All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Kli Yakar on Parshat Pinchas. Lovely to see you all on this beautiful morning. Doesn't just looking outside the window make you feel like you're at home? Anyway, we have a lot to do this morning on Parshat Pinchas. And the first part of our shiur is going to be dedicated to ladies. So in Parshat Pinchas, we have another census in the book of Numbers. And in the conclusion, we read as follows. Eilep Kudei Moshe ve'Elazar HaKohen. These are the countings, the reckonings of Moshe and Elazar HaKohen. Asher Pagdu et Bnei Israel ba'arvot Moav al Yarden Yerecha, who counted the Israelites in the plains of Moab by Yarden Yerecha. And then we are told, Uve'ele, amongst the countings in this week's Parsha of Parshat Pinchas, Lo haya ish mipkudei Moshe va'Aharon HaKohen, Asher Pagdu et Bnei Israel b'Midbar Sinai. There wasn't a single man who was present and included when Moshe and Aaron HaKohen counted the Israelites in Midbar Sinai. This is a completely new generation of people being counted. Why was that the case? Ki amar Hashem lahem, for Hashem said to them, Mot yamutu bamidbar, they will surely pass away in the wilderness, v'lo mehem ish, no man will remain from them, ki im, except for Kalev ben Yefuneh v'Yoshua ben Nun, the two exceptions to the rule. The rest of the generation died out. And so it wasn't that long ago that we were discussing events soon after we left Mitzrayim. We've now jumped forward almost 40 years, and we are ready to enter the land of Israel with a completely new generation. The Kli Yakar here is going to pick up on one important word, because we are told, amongst these, lo haya ish, there was no man, meaning there were no men who were present from the previous generation. Aval nashim hayu, but there were women. Why were there still women around? Ki lo nigzera gzerat meraglim ki im ala nashim. The decree and the punishment, or the consequence, whatever you want to call it, he's calling it a decree. The decree which happened as a result of the sin of the meraglim was only decreed against the gentlemen. Lefisha anashim hayu sonim et haaretz, because the men hated the land. V'hayu omrim, it's the men who said, Nitna rosh v'nashova mitzrayim, let's turn around and go back to Egypt. Aval hanashim hayu mechavavot et haaretz, but the women loved the land. He's already mentioned this at the beginning of the Parsha of the Meraglim. Shekain, as we see, Benot Tzlov in this week's Parsha, we have the Benot Tzlov Amru, they said, they said, please give us a stronghold in the land, give us a portion, give us an inheritance in the land. So the Kli Yakar says as follows. There were no men who survived the sin of the Meraglim from that generation. We have a completely new generation who's ready to enter the land. The Kli Yakar says, there were no men. However, there were women, because the women loved the land. Now, why did the women love the land? So far, the Kli Yakar hasn't told us why they loved the land and why the men hated the land. He has given us evidence that that was the case. Evidence that the men disliked the land is that they wanted to go back to Mitzrayim. Evidence that women loved the land is Benot Tzlov, so that's evidence, but it's not yet why. Why was it? What was it about women, or what was it about Eretz Yisrael, which meant that women loved the land as opposed to men? The Kli Yakar is going to suggest two reasons now. And he's going to say, I'm going to give two different reasons for this. Reason number one. There are places in the world which naturally raise and grow humble, modest individuals. There are places where it's just the natural way that that place creates and develops. That's the atmosphere of the place, that people behave in a modest way. And he's talking about sexual modesty here. But you've also got a place which naturally raises noafim, let's call them adulterers or promiscuous individuals. Amru Chazal, our sages told us, Shittim, the area of Shittim, Hayamegadel Noafim, that was a place which was just auspicious for promiscuity. Therefore, Zanu b'Shittim, that's why in the place of Shittim, that's where we misbehaved that way. Ki yeshivat hamakom hahu garam lahem. Not sitting in that place is what caused us to behave in that way. Now, it doesn't mean that we don't have free choice. It doesn't mean that we're not accountable for our decisions, but there are certain places where that place naturally leads people to behave in a certain way. However, on the other hand, the Eretz Yisrael mesugal bazeh, the skula of Eretz Yisrael, the special quality of Eretz Yisrael is she'ein haaretz soveret zima. It's a land which cannot take promiscuity. K'mo she'namar b'Parshat Arayot, it says in the Parsha of the forbidden relationships, ki et kol hatoevot asu anshei haaretz, as a result of the inhabitants of the land engaging in all the forbidden relationships, v'taki haaretz et yoshveha, the land will throw out, vomit out its inhabitants. The land of Israel itself cannot take such behavior. As we've already written above, this is quite a sweeping statement, and it's good that I'm addressing a group of predominantly women this morning. But it says that the men were prutzin ba'arayot. They were just completely awash with forbidden relationships. These were the men. These are the kind of people we're talking about in that generation. That really is a sweeping statement about the generation of the Midbar. And that's why they hated the land. Why do they hate the land? They couldn't imagine going to a land where they had to behave in a sexually proper way. That's why the men hated the land. They'd rather hang around in Shittim, in Vegas, and whatever the place is which naturally encourages and leads itself to certain behaviors. But to go and live in a land where you'll be kicked out of the land for certain behavior, that the men couldn't handle. But the women, on the other hand, hayu ksherot v'tznuot. The women were modest. The women were pure. The women didn't have those kind of thoughts or motivation, and therefore, for the women to move to a land where you're expected to behave on a higher level was no problem at all. For men, they were daunted by the higher expectations of moving to the land of Israel. That's reason number one. Moving on to reason number two. And whenever you have one question with more than one answer, it means that neither answer is perfect. Ta'am sheni hu. Reason two is as follows. Ki mehayadua, it is known, sheyesh hevdel ben Eretz Yisrael l'shar artzot. There's a difference between the land of Israel and all other countries. Ki be'eretz Yisrael hagshamim yoter mitzuyan mi be'eretz Mitzrayim. This isn't the only time this morning where the Kli Yakar is going to say something which goes against our classical understanding of things. He says in Israel, rain is more available than in Egypt or Shar Artzot, than other countries. Israel is the land where, compared to the rest of the region, there's actually a fair amount of rain. What does that mean? B'nei be'eretz Mitzrayim, in the land of Egypt, machar she'ein hagshamim mitzuyin sham, because there isn't much rain there. Al kein tzurchin ovdei ha'adama l'hashkot hasadot shel tvua b'ragleihem. The workers of the land in Mitzrayim have a much harder job to do in order to irrigate their fields, and they need to do it stomping through with their own feet. It's incredibly difficult work to irrigate fields in Mitzrayim. The way that you have to irrigate a gan hayerek, a garden for green things. Fascinatingly, he claims, because in Chutz La'aretz, it's such hard work in order to work the land. Patram HaTorah min haTrumot HaMa'asrot, you receive a tax exemption in Chutz La'aretz. You don't have to give Trumot and Ma'asrot in Chutz La'aretz. Ki ein shurat hadin noten sheiten chelek lemi shelo amal bo. It's unfair that you're working much harder and you have to pay the same rates. You turn up in Israel, you get the gshamim be'itam, the rain comes down, okay, then you can pay your tax. But outside Israel, in Mitzrayim, it's much harder to work the land. And the reason why you have to pay, I'm calling them taxes this morning, the taxes of Trumot and Ma'asrot inside Israel is because that's fair. But what, you want us to work really hard and pay the same rates? That's not fair. Aval Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel. Shagshamim yodin sham be'itam. In Israel, certainly if you behave yourself, the weather comes down at the right time. It's not such a big challenge to water your fields in the land of Israel. Okay, you have to sow the seed, you have to do the threshing, you have to do all the other normal things. Nevertheless, Yesh gam lakadosh baruch hu chelek basadeh. Hashem has an extra chelek in the field. Not an extra chelek. He's your partner in this endeavor. If you're in Mitzrayim, you're bringing the water and you're doing the rest of the work. If you're in Israel, there's a partnership. You do the work and Hashem brings the water. And when there's a partnership in this business, it's only fair that the partners share the profits. Hashem is providing the rain here. Okay, dinu, therefore it makes sense. So Hashem, from his portion, he wants his share of the profits from his contribution to the growth of the land to be given to his chevra, the Kohanim and the Leviim. Ki mishulchan gavoa hem zochim, they eat, as it were, from Hashem's table above. What's this got to do with men hating the land, women loving the land? He goes on to explain as follows. That's why the men hated the land. They were very strong-hearted or stubborn in terms of being very far away from tzedakah. Why would you go from the tax haven to the place with these increased tax rates? When you move to Israel, you have to pay Trumot and Masrot. So even if you disagree with the reason why you have to pay Trumot and Masrot in Israel as opposed to Chutz La'aretz, even if you disagree with the Kli Yakar's reasoning so far, the reality is when you pay in Israel from a halachic perspective, there are higher taxes. So why would you move to the land of paying higher tax? And they said this explicitly in the Torah, says the Kli Yakar, in case you're claiming that he's making this up. Okay, they said this explicitly. They said, "Zacharnu et hadaga shenochal b'Mitzrayim chinam." We remember the fish that we ate in Egypt, chinam, for free. When they spoke about the fish in Mitzrayim, it's not that they were eating amazing delicacies in Yerushalayim and the fish of the Nile was just so fantastic. No, the key word here is chinam. In Mitzrayim, they ate their food tax-free. V'dashu, but Sifrei explained in the Midrash, what does chinam mean? It is chinam min ha-mitzvot, free of mitzvot. Now, why would you care or appreciate the fact that it's free of mitzvot? The Kli Yakar explains, it's not that it was free of mitzvot in terms of they didn't have the fun and the enjoyment and the zchut of mitzvot. They didn't hate mitzvot. They just didn't like paying tax. The point is that they would eat without paying these portions. The men hated the concept of coming to the land of Israel, where you're going to have to give of your produce to other people. That is why the men did not want to enter the land of Israel. Reason number 2, according to the Kli Yakar. The women, however, did not look at it that way. Aval hanashim sheloto dor tzidkaniot hayu. The women of that generation were tzidkaniot. They were righteous. V'hayu ohavim hatzdaka, and they loved tzedakah. I recently was talking to somebody who needed to do a certain transaction in Eretz Yisrael, and it turned out that in order to do this transaction, they'd have to end up paying far more tax than they thought they were going to have to pay on this transaction. And what this person said was, you know what? I'm going to view this as my contribution to Israel's fight against coronavirus. Let the Israeli governments take my tax. I'd rather pay tax in Israel than pay tax elsewhere, because when you pay your taxes in Israel, you're contributing towards the overall project of the Holy Land. There's a real value there. And the women loved tzedakah. They didn't view it as a tax. They viewed it as an opportunity to share of their wealth with those who needed that opportunity. Whether it's a mitzvah of chala, which is a special mitzvah for women and has a special status in Israel, that's not our halachic discussion today. And women love the idea of all the tax. They said, great, let's go to Israel, the land where we're going to have to share with everybody else. Now, if the Kli Yakar would have missed out the words in red today, he would have done well in 2020. And if I would have missed out the words in red today, I also could have done better in 2020, but we're here to learn the Kli Yakar and see what he says. And this is what he says. Why would women not be so concerned about because because the normal situation is that a woman isn't in control of the property, meaning she's not running the account, she's not running the books. And therefore, it's not the women who'd have to pay the tax anyway. It was the men's responsibility, and therefore women weren't put off by the tax rates in Israel because it really wasn't their business. Certainly, jumping back a few hundred years, when the Kli Yakar wrote this, there was nothing offensive about suggesting that. Nowadays, to suggest that it's the men who make the profit and spend the tax, and it's just the women who spend the money on a credit card, is an offensive thing to say, but it's there, and so we read it. V'zesh amru Chazal, but in this general context, where the men disliked the concept of going into the land because of everything they'd have to pay, and the women did it, and the women loved the concept. It says in the Gemara in Sotah, Bizchut nashim tzidkaniyot. It was in the merit of these righteous women, shahayu b'oton dor, who were in that generation. It's the second time he said the women of that generation. It's the second time he said that generation. I don't know if he had a problem with the women of his generation. Either way, nigalu avotenu mimitzrayim. Our forefathers were redeemed from Egypt. Ratzal Omar, i.e., Bizchutam yatzu mimakom haptor lemakom hachiyuv. It was in the merit of these women that we moved from a tax haven to a place where we'd have to pay, asher elav nichsafa, which they deeply longed to enter. So that was part one of today's shiur. The reason why women survived the Midbar, some of them, in order to enter the land of Israel, as opposed to the men, because the women loved the land, as opposed to the men who were rather daunted by the prospect of giving away of their wealth to others. That ties into our next section, which is the daughters of Tzlofchad. And today we're not going to focus on the story of the daughters of Tzlofchad themselves. Rather, we're just going to use it as a backdrop for the section which follows. So this is now just doing some background activity before we reach the following passage of the Kli Yakar. And we read towards the end of the story of the daughters of Tzlofchad who came along to Moshe with a claim. Moshe wasn't quite sure what to do. Vayom Hashem el Moshe le'emor, in source number 3, Hashem said to Moshe as follows, Kain bnot Tzlofchad dovrot. The daughters of Tzlofchad are speaking truth. Naton titen lehem achuzat nachala b'toch achei avehem. You should certainly give them a portion of inheritance amongst the brothers of their father. V'ha'avarta et nachalat avihen lahen, and you should transfer the portion of their father to them. And the key word which we're going to pick up on here is the word v'ha'avarta. You should transfer. So the portion is being transferred. And Hashem tells Moshe, this isn't a one-off ruling for the daughters of the Tzlofchad, but you should know this is always going to be the case. Ve'el b'nei Yisrael tedaber le'emor, speak unto the Israelites as follows, Ish ki yamut, if somebody passes away, uven ein lo, without a son, v'ha'avartem et nachlato levito, you should transfer his portion to his daughter. So twice we have the word here of transfer, and it's a transfer of inheritance. And picking up on the word v'ha'avartem, Rashi says something here which it is what it is. So we'll read it. Source number 4. V'ha'avarta, you should transfer. Lashon aveirahu. The word ha'avara here doesn't just come from laha'avir, which is to pass over, but it's an aveira, which is the transgression. What transgression do we have here? B'mi she'eino maniach ben liyorsho, if somebody hasn't left behind a son to inherit them. Now, on a simple reading, which will not be the Kli Yakar's reading today, on a simple reading of Rashi, if somebody hasn't had a child, a male, in addition to a female, they haven't fully fulfilled the mitzvah of Pru Uravu, and therefore there's an element of Aveira there. I find that difficult to read because you have great tzaddikim who haven't had sons. What can you do? Whether it's great tzaddikim like Rav Rimon, who has Baruch Hashem Kanai Nahara many, many daughters and no sons, or you have people who, what can you do? Struggle to have children. It's not something we talk about publicly because it's not something that you ever would want anyone in your crowd to feel uncomfortable about, and therefore I can't really stand up in shul and talk about it because there will always be somebody in shul who's directly impacted by this pain and this experience. But it's far more common than we talk about, far more common than we acknowledge that there are infertility issues, and certainly there's no reason to add a layer of guilt or religious guilt onto somebody who's having a difficult time conceiving or for whatever reason was unable to conceive. Nevertheless, that's what Rashi says. The Kli Yakar is going to explain it differently. But the
Rashi
general
also
concept
has
is
only 3 daughters.
if you haven't had a son. Davar acher, Rashi does also explain this differently. If you didn't like that explanation, because the daughter, as a result of the property being transferred to the daughter, through her, the property is being transferred to a different tribe. Because if she's going to marry a man from another tribe, and therefore the property moves over to that tribe. This phrase appears twice. Usually when it comes to property, it's you should give. When it comes to a daughter, it's a transfer because it's almost transferring out of the tribe. All of that is a backdrop to that which comes next. Straight after the story of the Benot Tzlofchad, we have the following happening. In source number 5, Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, Hashem says to Moshe, Ale el har ha'avarim hazeh, ascend to har ha'avarim, ure'ei et ha'aretz asher natati levnei Yisrael, and you will see the land that I have given to the Israelites. Urita ota, and you shall see it. V'ne'esafta el amecha, you shall pass away. Gam ata kasher nesaf Aaron achicha, you too, just like your brother Aaron passed away in that beautiful manner, you're also going to have that beautiful kiss of death from Hashem. That is the beautiful way that you are going to pass away. So we go straight from the Benot Tzlofchad into the death of Moshe. And the Kli Yakar in source number 6 asks 3 questions here. Ale al haravarim hazeh, etc. Sarich iyun, we need to really understand what's going on here. Number 1, Lama nismacha Parsha zo lakan, why is this Parsha, the death of Moshe, juxtaposed to the story of the daughters of Tzlofchad? Number 2, V'lama karala har navo ha'avarim. Moshe Rabbeinu passed away on Har Navo. So why is Har Navo called Har Ha'avarim in this instance? Question number 3. Moshe's immediate response, as we're going to see, is to, he doesn't wallow in self-pity. He says, all right, Hashem, who's taking over? Let's appoint somebody. I need a successor. Hashem, the God of the spirits of all flesh, should appoint somebody to lead the assembly. We'll see that in greater detail in a few minutes. But the question is, Lama lo bikesh sheyanchil srarato levanav? Why didn't Moshe ask for his sons to take over? I mean, Aaron had Elazar Kohen take over, his son took over, and that was part of his passing away. Part of the process of Aaron passing away was him removing his clothing, and the clothing being placed on Elazar. It was part of the package deal. So when Hashem says to Moshe, you're going to pass away, why doesn't Moshe say, all right, who can I bring with me? Which of my sons are going to take over from me? But Moshe doesn't ask for his sons to take over. The fact that Moshe's sons did not succeed him is a major concept. It's a brilliant concept. The Kli Yakar will give one approach today. Maybe on Thursday night this week, that'll be the topic of my shiur, something I call RSS, which is Rabbi Son Syndrome. There's another version of it, which is RDS, Rabbi's Daughters Syndrome. It's an amazing concept, and it's not unique to rabbinic families. It can happen in numerous families where you have very dominant public figures in the families and the impact that might have on the children of those families. Either way, the Kli Yakar is going to reflect on that concept today. And he's going to say, Vakarov Elai Lomar Bazeh. I would like to suggest as follows. Because just before this passage it says, you will transfer the inheritance to the daughter. Pirush Rashi says, why is the expression here to teach you? As we saw, anybody who doesn't leave a son to inherit them, Hashem considers it that they've done an Aveira. And the Kli Yakar is going to read this carefully. He's going to say, "V'yesh ledaktek." We have to ask very carefully. Leyorsho lamali. Why does Rashi say that whoever hasn't left a son to inherit them has done an avera? Why do we need the word leyorsho? Havalela meimar. You could have just said, "Kol mi sheino maniach ben." Whoever doesn't leave a son. Why does it say, whoever doesn't leave a son, le yorsha? The Kli Yakar explains. It means, af al pi shemeniach ben. It's possible that you do leave a son, but you don't leave somebody to succeed you. You see, the Kli Yakar is explaining Rashi's statement as following. It's not that you don't leave a son, meaning you didn't give birth to a male child. It means you didn't leave a male successor. The focus here is that you didn't have a child who is fitting to take over from you. Dahainu, which means who isn't fitting to succeed the father where it comes to Torah and wisdom, v'srara, and leadership authority. As Hakadosh Baruch Hu maleh v'rav. That's when Hashem considers it to be an aveira. Because he didn't successfully educate and guide his child to take over from him. We're talking about a spiritual inheritance here. So he's going to ask, where does Rashi get this from? How does Rashi know this? If you can't really learn this from Tzlofchad himself. Tzlofchad didn't have any sons. That's the whole point of the story of Tzlofchad. You got the man who doesn't have sons, he's only got daughters. So why in the context of Tzlofchad, or how in the context of Tzlofchad, does Rashi know that we're talking about somebody who does have a son or sons, but they go off the derech? No, but Rashi is relying on the fact that this is juxtaposed with the phrase that Moshe should go up to Har HaAvarim. Shelekach kara HaKadosh Baruch Hu shmo Har HaAvarim. Why did Hashem call it Har HaAvarim? Ki alav nitmaleh Hashem aveira al Moshe. It is the mount of the aveira al shelo hidrichet banav shorein liyorsho. That Moshe didn't successfully ensure that one of his children at least would be able to take over from him, to inherit Srarato, his authority, and Nevuato, and his prophecy. And prophecy all depends on the recipient of the prophecy being successfully trained and refined in order to tune in to the word of Hashem. So, Har HaAvarim, Moshe's mount where he passed away, is called the Mount of the Aveira because it's the mount where he doesn't have his sons taking over from him. And therefore, Rashi knows that previously, Ha'avartem, the expression of Ha'avartem, is an expression of when you have sons, but they aren't able to take over from you. And he says, Moshe, because Hashem called this mountain Ha'avarim, Moshe understood that his honor isn't going to be transferred onto his sons. Once Moshe understood that this was impossible, Amar miyad, what's his immediate response? All right, you've got that, okay, Haruchot, Hashem, appoint somebody else. Af al pi shel yorsho lo yityashev, af al pi shel yorsho, okay, even though to inherit him, lo yityashev al zeh ofen etzel tzlofchad. Now, if we are consistent and we try to implement the meaning of this word in the context of Tzlofchad, this isn't very clean now, because Tzlofchad didn't have any sons. And that's the context in Rashi said it. And the Kli Yakar is acknowledging that there's something a bit untidy in what he's trying to achieve here. Mikol makom, nevertheless, nakat lashon zeba vo Moshe ka'amur, in the context of Tzlofchad, it uses this expression because of what it's going to mean afterwards in the context of Moshe. So when it comes to being textually consistent, the Kli Yakar is a bit untidy here. When it comes to dealing with big issues, he touches on a very significant point, which is that Moshe is not succeeded by his children. How did that happen? Or why did that happen? He didn't quite explain why that was the case, but he certainly views it as an aveira, on a misgiving of Moshe, on a failing of Moshe, that he did not succeed in educating his children to take over from him. If you consider Moshe's life and how much interaction he had with his wife and his children during those years, it's certainly not your normal family setup. And maybe on Thursday night this week, we will look in greater detail at why Moshe's sons did not succeed him. Moving on, we now have the appointment of Yehoshua. Moshe said to Hashem as follows, as we've just seen, he's going to say, and let's pay attention to the exchange here. Yifgod Hashem Elokei Haruchot L'chol Basar Ish Al Haida. Hashem, who is the God of the spirits of all flesh, should appoint a man over the assembly. And note how Moshe here calls Hashem Elokei Haruchot L'chol Basar, the God of the spirits of all flesh, the God of Ruach. And what's this person going to do? Asher Yetzei Lifneihem. This is the position and description. He's going to go out before them. Vasher Yavo Lifneihem. He'll come in before them. Vasher Yotziam, and he'll take them out. Yotziam, he'll take them out. Vasher Yiviem, and he'll bring them in. V'lo dat Hashem katzon asher ein lahem ro'eh. And the assembly of Hashem should not be like a flock which does not have a shepherd. Now, what's going on here? The job description is that which was put in the Sinai Times or the Midbar Times that week. We need Moshe says to Hashem, I need a successor who's going to go out before us, come in before us, bring us out and bring us in. What does any of that mean? We'll see that later. Vayom Hashem al Moshe, Hashem said to Moshe, Kach lecha et Yoshua bin Nun. Take Yoshua bin Nun. Ish asher ruach bo. He fits the description. He's somebody who has ruach, or he matches Moshe's description of Hashem here. Take Yoshua, a man of ruach. And now pay attention. V'samachta et yadcha alav. You should place your hand on him. And you should place him before Elazar Kohen and the whole assembly, and you should appoint him before their eyes. And you should place from your glory on him, so that all the assembly of Israel hear. A couple of psukim later we read. Moshe did what Hashem told him to do. Moshe did what Hashem commanded him to do. Vayikach et Yehoshua. He took Yehoshua. Vayimideu lifnei Elazar HaKohen. He put him up there before Elazar HaKohen. V'lifnei kol ha'edah, before the whole assembly. Vayismoch et yadav alav. And he rested his hands on him. Vayetzavehu, and he appointed him, kasher diber Hashem bi'ad Moshe, as Hashem had commanded in the hand of Moshe. So we're told Moshe did what Hashem told him to do. And we're told he did as Hashem commanded him to do. And in the middle, sandwiched between those two sayings, we have Moshe doing apparently what Hashem commanded him to do. However, let me ask you, did Moshe do exactly what Hashem told him to do?
He reversed the order.
He reversed the order.
He put both hands on. He put both hands on, not just one hand.
Excellent. So he's reversed the order, which the Kli Yakar isn't going to pick up on. But note how in the instruction over here, Hashem says to him, "V'samachta et yadcha alav," place your hand singular on him. And then we're told, Moshe did what Hashem told him to do. And he placed his hands plural on him, as Hashem told him to do. So something's unusual here. Number one, it appears that Moshe did not do what Hashem told him to do exactly. And number two, you can't say that Moshe didn't do what Hashem told him to do, because twice we're told that he did what Hashem told him to do. So what's going on here? Did he put one hand on, two hands on? What was he supposed to do? What was this? What does this all mean? And I know that some of you are thinking, wait a second, we spoke about this at the beginning of Parshat Vayikra, where the Kli Yakar spoke exactly about this point. And if that's what you're thinking, shkoyach, and we did, but we're going to review it today in the correct context. Source number 8 is Rashi. He's going to be the background for the Kli Yakar. Rashi will say, "Vayismach et yadav," he rested his hands, but ayin yafeh yoter, v'yoter memashen istava. This was with tremendous generosity, and more than he was commanded. So Hashem told him to put one hand on, and with even greater generosity and affection and emotion, Moshe places both hands on the guy. Shakadosh Baruch Hu amar lo v'samachti yadcha. Hashem said one hand, v'asa b'shtei yadav, he did it with both hands. And Moshe just made Yehoshua like this vessel, just filled, completely stuffed with holiness. And he just filled him with wisdom, with tremendous generosity. That's all well and good for Rashi to say that. The challenge with Rashi's explanation is that Rashi says that he did more than Hashem commanded. More than Hashem commanded is number one, not what Hashem commanded. And number two, are we allowed to do more than Hashem commanded? We're not allowed to do more than Hashem commanded. So let's try and make sense of all of this. Source number 9. V'samachta et yadcha alav. Kli Yakar tells us. Yadcha achat b'mashma, it appears that he was only supposed to put one hand on. But when it came to actually delivering, it says, Vaismach et yadav, he put hands plural. Pirish Rashi Yotem Mashinas Taban. Rashi says more than he was commanded. Ulefid Varav Kasher, the Kli Yakar says Rashi's words are difficult. Eich avar Moshe b'Baal Tosef. How did Moshe here transgress against the biblical prohibition of adding on to what it says in the Torah? If you say to yourself, you know what, I really want to have an extra section in my tefillin, I want to have 5 instead of 4, you can't do that. The Torah says that it should be what it should be, and you're not allowed to add on to that. What if you say, I want to have 5 minim in my lulav? I really want to add in bottle brush to bring a bit of a local feel into the lulav and to reflect my multiple identities. You can't do that. Arba'at haminim are the 4 kinds and not the 5 kinds. You're not allowed to add on to what Hashem told you to do. And Hashem told Moshe one hand. One hand means one hand. And Rashi comes along and says Moshe did more, but the Kli Yakar says you're not allowed to do more. However, the Kli Yakar comments that we do have a precedent for this. Shne'emar, because we saw at the beginning of the book of Vayikra, we're told, in the instructions for Korbanot, V'samach yado al rosh ha'olah, you shall place your hand singular on the head of the burnt offering, yado achat b'mashba, meaning a single hand. Over Ma'aseh Ketiv, when it comes down to it, 14 chapters later, I mean, there are many Korbanot in between where it's single hand, single hand, single hand, single hand. However, when it comes to the Se'ir HaMishtaleach, let's call it the scapegoat, there it says, V'samach Aaron et shtei yadav al rosh ha'sa'ir, Aaron placed both hands on the scapegoat. So, we have a precedent. We have an occasion where Hashem tells Moshe, the instruction is you should place one hand, and in reality, 2 hands were placed. Now, what have the 2 things got to do with each other? The Kli Yakar says they are directly connected. We explained it in the Parshat Vayikra that truly, Shakol inyan echad. This is really just one subject with 2 different expressions. Why? Ki manhigei ha'am tzrichim lekabel aleihem. The leaders of the nation need to accept upon themselves al manatchu kapara va'asham al kol ha'am, that the leaders themselves are an atonement and a guilt offering for the people. When you enter a position of Jewish leadership, you are going there to be slaughtered. You are going there to be the kapara, to be the scapegoat, to be the offering for the people. And he says, we have that in the appointment of the leader. The same way that the process of the atoning individual placing their hand on the sacrifice is to transfer any guilt or misgivings from the person bringing the korban onto the korban itself, the huah korban. So what happens with the korban is when you bring a korban, you do smicha on the korban, meaning you transfer your own guilt onto the korban. And then that korban is shechted, which makes you realize that I really myself should have been shechted. Or you see the korban being ripped apart and you see that it's really just flesh and blood, and you think, I'm just flesh and blood and muscle and fat, and this really could have been me, and it really makes you think about who you are, and it's a process of tshuva. That's what smicha is. Smicha is a transfer of responsibility and guilt from one being onto another thing. So the smicha on an animal is where the person who has sinned places their guilt onto the animal. And he goes on to say, Kach smichat yad zo, it's the same thing when you give smicha to a religious leader. Liten shemet v'dofi shall kol Yisrael is to transfer the guilt of the whole of Israel al manhigehem, on their leaders. Lomar, to say, she'ashmat ha'am talui bahem, the guilt of the nation depends on them. They are responsible for the spiritual success of their nation, and they're also responsible for the spiritual failure of their nation. That's what smicha is. Smicha is putting all the blame onto the religious leader. Now, there are 2 forms of smicha, he goes on to say. When it comes to general korbanot, there are 2 forms of smicha. Somebody who sins when it comes to their deeds, actions, chet or kaful, really that's a double sin. Why is that the case? Ki ein ma'aseh b'lo machshava. There's no deed without thinking about it first. Hakodemet lema'aseh. There's always a thought process which precedes the action. Even if you say, I did it without thinking, that's not true. You always think before you do something. That's why when it comes to the se'ir ha'mishtaleach, it says, V'samach Aaron et shtei yadav, that's two hands. Because that's here we're talking about the context of Yom Kippur. You send this in order to atone for two types of sin: the sin of action, in addition to the sin of inappropriate thoughts ahead of the action. Aval ha'olah, when it comes to a burnt offering, Baal chet ha'herhor, that's only for your thoughts, levad, alone. That's why sometimes you only have one hand. So, a sin of thoughts has one hand. A sin of actions has two hands, one for thought and one for action. So, how many hands should you use when doing smicha onto a Jewish leader? What are you going to blame the leader for? Are you going to blame the leader for the people's actions? Or are you going to blame the leader for the people's thoughts and their actions? It's actually quite fun not being a leader because the leader gets all the blame. Manigei Yisrael, he says it's the same thing for the Jewish leaders. They carry upon their shoulders the iniquity of the people. Whether they've sinned with their deeds or they've sinned with their thoughts. Why is this the case? Why do we keep blaming the leader? Why are we putting it on the leader? It is in a situation where the leader has the power to protest and does not protest. When is the leader responsible for the sins of a nation? The leader is responsible for the sins of their followers when the leader has neglected the opportunity to correct the ways of their followers. And if the leader had the opportunity to speak up and they didn't speak up, or the leader had an opportunity to correct something and they didn't correct it, and then the followers went and sinned anyway, or if the leader had an opportunity to inspire and they didn't inspire, and even to impact people's minds and they didn't do that successfully, the leader is responsible, and you can blame the leader when things go wrong. Now, is this fair? Okay, let's say you've got a group of followers who's gone and done something really terrible, and the leader sees them planning this, and the leader sees them doing this, and the leader keeps quiet and doesn't even try, and they go ahead and do it, and they say, you know what? The leader is responsible for the failures which took place in their department, or the leader is responsible for the failures which took place under their nose. They saw all of this happening, they knew about this, and they weren't successful in stopping it. The leader is responsible. That's one thing. But can you really blame a leader for the thoughts of their followers? Is that really a sin that you could blame the leader for? That the leader on Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, has to stand before Hashem and accept responsibility for the thoughts of their followers? Is that fair? And he goes on to explain at the top of page 4. Ha'omnam, however, lo kol ro'eh u'manhig nitpas al avon zulato kshu choteh behirhu levad. He says, not every leader is held responsibility for the sins of others if all they've done is sin in their thoughts. Why? Well, it makes sense. Because these hidden things are known to Hashem. Who knows what's hidden in his friend? Who knows what someone else is secretly planning or imagining or thinking? As Rashi explains in Parshat Nitzavim. So the Kli Yakar acknowledges not all leaders can be held responsible for the thought processes, for the minds, for the intentions of their followers. However, what type of leader can be held responsible? But if the shepherd is one who has ruach, meaning they have ruach hakodesh, or let's in different terms. Let's say, if you don't want to believe too strongly in Ruach HaKodesh, let's say they have exceptional intuition. If the leader has the divinely inspired intuition to know what's going on in people's minds, that he knows how to respond to every single individual spirit. When you're a leader like Yehoshua, and he knows to understand which way the wind is blowing for every individual. As dinhu shitapes gamal chetahirhu, then such a leader should be held responsible for the sin of thoughts. Because with his Ruach HaKodesh, he's able to see what's going on. He's got this X-ray vision or this intuition to know what's going on. Everything that's going on his friend spiritually. Whether it's positive or negative. And he should have responded. And I think when we're talking about a leader understanding with Ruach HaKodesh that which is going on among their followers, I don't think we're just talking about some magical X-ray vision to know what's going on here. I think it's saying that leaders at a certain level need to have the intuition to understand where things are coming from, to understand what's driving certain activities, to understand where things might lead, to understand what's going on in the background. You have to have that strong level of connection and intuition with individuals in order to successfully lead. And therefore, if things have gone wrong and the leader says, you know what, I didn't know that that's what my followers were thinking all along. For certain leaders, that's a failure of leadership because it's what they were thinking and they didn't write it down and they didn't say it, but you should understand what they're thinking and understand the way things are going. And to succeed Moshe, you need to be an ish asher ruach bo. You need to be somebody who has that spirit, meaning the ability to understand that which is going on in people's minds as well. And therefore, when you are being replaced, if you're Moshe Rabbeinu, if you are replacing Moshe Rabbeinu, your process is a two-handed process. That's why it says, take Yoshua ben Nun, Ish asher ruach bo, he has Ruach HaKodesh, which is hugely important. He'll know what's going on. Place one hand on him. What does it mean, place a hand on Yehoshua? But akat yadcha l'rabuta, it means place an extra hand on Yehoshua. Because obviously you're always going to put one hand on Yehoshua, but Hashem tells Moshe, place your other hand on Yehoshua. Which means when Moshe then places two hands, he's doing exactly what Hashem told him to do. Here it's only talking about spiritual sins, meaning things which appear in their minds. To make that iniquity, that problem placed on that individual. Obviously, Chet HaMaaseh will be there as well. Just to summarize where we are in terms of the Parsha, before we look at this from a different angle. Hashem told Moshe to place one hand on Yehoshua. Moshe ended up placing two hands on Yehoshua. But the Torah tells us Moshe did exactly what Hashem told him to do. In fact, the Torah tells us twice. Why? Because the Kli Yakar believes that when Hashem told Moshe to place one hand on Yehoshua, he was talking about the other hand. Obviously, Moshe was always going to put one hand, but Hashem tells Moshe, place the other hand on Yehoshua, the hand of responsibility for people's thoughts. Why would you be held responsible for other people's thoughts? You would only be responsible for other people's thoughts if you're an ish asher ruach bo, if you have that incredible ruach hakodesh, that intuition to know what other people are thinking, then you can be held responsible. But ultimately, Moshe did what Hashem told him to do because it was always meant to be a two-handed gesture. If you don't like that explanation, give me one more chance. Alternatively, let's try one other one. Perush acher, a different explanation. Because the Kli Yakar acknowledges. Listen, it does say at the end of the day, Kasher diber Hashem biyad Moshe, as Hashem spoke in Moshe's hands. Shemoshe lo haya meshaneh davar v'haya somech alav yad achat v'lo shtayim. He says, you know what? Actually, Moshe only put one hand on Yehoshua. Hashem told Moshe to put one hand on Yehoshua, and Moshe only put one hand on Yehoshua. That's very nice. The problem is the Torah says that Moshe put two hands on Yehoshua. So what does that mean? When the Torah says, Vayismoch et yadav, plural, alav, his hands, kach perusho, it means, Shemoshe masar liYehoshua shnei minei hanhagot. It's not an actual physical expression of Moshe placing two hands. He didn't do that. He only put one hand. When it says that Moshe placed his hands on Yehoshua, it means Moshe transferred to Yehoshua two different leadership positions. Ha'achat, number one, Hanagah b'Torah mitzvot. It is the religious, spiritual leadership. Hashniya, the second, is Hanagah ha'medinit, the political leadership. So the expression of Moshe placing his hands on Yehoshua is not a literal expression. It's an expression of Moshe transferring to Yehoshua both the spiritual leadership and the political leadership. Now we're going to be able to explain that interesting phrase that the job description was somebody who's going to go before them and come before them, take them out and bring them in. We'll explain that in a moment. We'll see he gave him two forms of leadership. Now, the next section of the Kli Yakar is really, really fascinating, I think. And there's no, I think he could have written it nowadays, but it would have been so popular nowadays. What the Kli Yakar is going to say as follows. There are two types of leadership, political and religious. When it comes to one of them, you have to rule by force. No compromise, lay down the law, it is what it is. And when it comes to the other one, you have to rule gently, with understanding, with flexibility, and with love, and with keruv, and with outreach, and bring people along with you on a journey. Now, which is which? For which of them do you have to rule by force, and for which of them can you be gentle? Nowadays, what's the common perception? When it comes to political issues, if you have to pay a parking fine, you have to pay a parking fine. It is what it is. There's no real room for flexibility there. And if you break the law, you break the law. When it comes to political things, you have to lay down the law. No room for flexibility there. When it comes to Torah and mitzvot, try your best. It's okay for your age. You're still under 90, or whatever excuses you come up with to be gentle and accepting and understanding. That's the way things are nowadays. The Kli Yakar is going to say the absolute opposite. And he says as follows. Al hanagash al pi haTorah v'hamitzvah. When it comes to religious leadership, Amar, Moshe said to Yehoshua, Asher Yotziem, or Moshe gave the position description, Asher Yotziem v'Asher Yeviem, the one who's going to bring them out and the one who's going to bring them in. This means you're going to schlep them in and schlep them out. It's not you're going to go before them, come in before them. It's bringing them, it's taking them from place to place. V'Yotziem, what it means, Bar Karcha Mashme, it means by force. Going out and going in, we've seen, is a reference to halacha. Like it says in Devarim, Moshe says, I can't go out or come in anymore. Pirush Rashi explains with Dvar halacha. It means with halachic matters. And therefore Moshe tells Yehoshua, the position description is to force them with the strength of the hand to keep Torah and the service of Hashem. Do it with all your force. The kofam, to force them al shmirat Torah, to keep the Torah. B'chol tokef va'oz, with full authority and strength and might. Now, why when it comes to Torah can't you take a loving, gentle, soft approach? When it comes to Torah, you can't say, you know what, you have to have a certain balance. Your left hand should push away, but your right hand should bring forwards. Good cop, bad cop. You can't do that when it comes to Torah. Who gave you the right to be flexible with Hashem's laws? Who gave you the right to say, you know what? Hashem says this, but you know what? I say it's not the end of the world. I say take it easy. I say be flexible. I say don't worry. The most important thing is to adapt to whatever the general ethical feelings are of the generation. Who gave you the right to do that? Who gave you the right to be flexible with the application of Hashem's Torah? That's not your right to do that. This is a two-handed activity, the religious leadership. The leadership and the ways of Hashem has to be with full force. However, when it comes to politics, When it comes to the political leadership, litikun hamatzav, just for general civil behavior, amar asher yetzei lifnehem v'asher yavo lifnehem, the one who'll go out in front of them, and the one who'll come in front of them. Lomar, which means shebanachat yenahalem. You're not schlepping them around when you're the political leader. It's banachat. It's all gently. Don't try and force them. And when it came to this, he only placed one hand on him. So when Moshe appoints Yoshua as the spiritual leader, it's almost a two-handed motion, saying with strength, lead them, you could do it. And when it comes to the political leadership, it's just one hand, because it's a lot more room there for flexibility. He says, listen, I'm giving you some political advice, some pragmatic advice. These are a stiff-necked people. And the way they respond is just to kick back at their leaders. They don't respond well to leadership by force. And therefore you need to have a certain balance in your approach. You go out before them, you come in before them, and they'll follow you. Let them go by themselves, don't force them. Not like someone who's going to hold on to you and drag you along. So the Kli Yakar says, because we're a people that doesn't respond well to authority, don't enforce your authority. But the Kli Yakar also says there's a limit to how much flexibility we can show. We can show flexibility in certain areas because the people won't listen, but he says in other areas, we just don't have the right to show that flexibility. It's not our flexibility to show. It's a fascinating approach which is diametrically opposed to the way many things are understood or viewed nowadays. And he goes on to say, this also explains one more discrepancy in the Torah. With this, we will conclude. Maybe that's why when it comes to the instructions, Moshe says to Yoshua, Ki ata tavo et ha'am hazeh. You will come with this people. V'Hakadosh amar Baruch Hu amar Yoshua, but Hashem said to Yoshua, Ki ata tavi et bnei Israel. You will bring bnei Israel. So Moshe said to Yoshua, tavo, which is a more gentle, relaxed, you'll go on this journey together. Hashem said to Yoshua, you're going to tavi, you're going to schlep them, you're going to bring them along. Baal korach mashma, Hashem's instruction appears to be a bit more by force. V'lo kasha, he says, no, there's no contradiction here at all. Ki Moshe hayam medaber me'inyan hanagah medinit. They were talking about two different things. When Moshe said to Yoshua, you're going to come along with the people, he was talking about the political leadership. V'aleh amar, and in that context he said, Ki ata tavo, you'll come along with the people at ha'am hazeh. Hakol lefi da'atam va'atzatam. Do it based on their opinion and their advice. You can work around them, work with them. That you can do gently. Rashi explains there. Aval, however, Hakadosh Baruch Hu hayam mezarzo al hanagat Torah. Hashem was telling him about Torah leadership. Va'aleh amar, when it comes to Torah leadership, what does it say? Ki ata tavi. You must lay down the law. You will bring in the people. As Be'ezrat Hashem, we will see when we learn the Kli Yakar on Parshat Vayelech. I think there's real food for thought here. I don't think it's a black and white question as to whether the Kli Yakar is right or wrong, but I think we have to ask ourselves, is our approach always the best approach? And are we always doing the best thing? And is it always correct? Is it, should everything be done with love? And should everything be done gently? And do we have the right to show flexibility in every area where flexibility is being shown? Or should we sometimes lay down the law? And when we do lay down the law, what is the best way to do it? These aren't simple questions, but leadership isn't simple. Certainly leadership of Am Yisrael isn't simple. And certainly leadership of Am Yisrael to succeed Moshe Rabbeinu, to successfully bring Am Yisrael into Eretz Yisrael, for us to inherit the land, is no small deal. It's a very, very big deal. And I think the Kli Yakar has a lot to teach us about this. That's it for this morning. I wish you all a Shavua Tov and a great week.
Thank you.
Thank you, Yashakaya.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Great way to start the week.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good week, everyone. Bye.
Yeah. Bye. Yeah.